This is Gamechangers Podcast, inspiring conversations with leaders of tomorrow.
Hey guys, welcome back to the Gamechangers Podcast. My name is Ajay, and I have Harsh with me.
Hey guys.
Today on the show, we have a very special guest, Jasmin Kaur. Jasmin is a world-renowned poet, artist, and writer and illustrator. Thanks a lot for being on the show, Jasmin.
Thank you for having me. I'm so excited to be here.
No, definitely. Thanks for coming on. I know you just had a book signing for your new book.
Yeah.
Called When You Ask Me Where I'm Going,
yes.
with Montague Movement at the university. How was that?
It was awesome. So we had our Edmonton event today, which I was super excited for, and the Montague Movement, which is, an organization local to Edmonton and the University of Alberta, kind of curated a space where we got to have conversations about mental health and stigma and destigmatizing, these kind of taboo topics, while, using poetry as like a vehicle to make the conversation happen.
Definitely. And shout out to Montague Movement for actually connecting us with Jasmin so we can have her on. So going off of this, we want to ask you a little bit about your book, right? You just launched this recently in October. So tell us a little bit about what you're trying to do with this book and what it's about. And
yeah. So When You Ask Me Where I'm Going is my debut collection of poetry and prose and artwork. And it's essentially, a book told in multiple voices and multiple perspectives, but ultimately that kind of tries to capture what it feels like to be a woman, and more particularly a Sikh woman, living in a society that doesn't always see you or understand you. I grew up in Abbotsford, BC. I was born and raised there, and navigating like a society that's not always hospitable to my identity, both as a Sikh and just like me being who I am as like a girl and a woman. There's like a lot to unpack there, and I feel like my poetry kind of digs into all of it, like, from immigration and racism to like mental health and feminism and like everything like literally in between. This book is just like what it feels like to be a woman in like today's age.
Wow. So do you think like a lot of the book comes from you when you were growing up in BC, and a lot of your experiences in that maybe other women also may have shared some of those?
Yeah. So some of the poems are autobiographical. I have poems that deal directly with like my neighborhood in West Abbotsford, which is the, primarily Punjabi neighborhood, but a neighborhood that's super stigmatized and, vilified like in the media because of, gang conflict and like all these sorts of things. And growing up in these kind of spaces, when you see your neighborhood only seen as like this one thing, you want to just like explain the rest of it, and that's what I try to do with my book. Talk about all of it, and not just like those stereotypes. It's complicated, like growing up where I grew up, and I wish that people understood like the nuance of like immigrant communities and like what is actually happening and why. And oftentimes, like mainstream media doesn't give us that nuance. Mainstream media kind of puts us into a box and, describes South Asian youth or Punjabi youth more specifically within like these stereotypes. And that's kind of what happens when, our stories are constantly being told for us. So to be able to have this book now and to be able to write our stories on our own and to be able to tell our perspectives without that kind of filter of like, a white gaze is like a cool thing to me, and something that's like so overdue.
It's very organic, right?
Yeah.
Because you're doing it by yourself. So
yeah.
From a first person experience.
Absolutely. So I'm just like super grateful that I get to do this work and get to, be one voice among what I hope to be like so many more, South Asian women who are taking up space in storytelling.
That's honestly so dope. The way like you can put that, kind of just, you're right, like getting our own perspective in a sense, because it's so like organic, because it comes from like this different perspective. For so long, like the mainstream media has been dictating the image, and to see people like you step into positions of power now, or people, and getting people's like making people more aware. I think that's the biggest thing, right?
Right.
So props to you for that. And I guess the thing we want to transition to, do you have a favorite like passage or poem from your book that you like to read to us?
So the title of the book is When You Ask Me Where I'm Going. And folks always ask me what the title means, and it's actually inspired by one of the poems in the book. And I feel like the poem itself like encapsulates like the meaning, and I don't have to explain anything further. So this is on page 38. The next time you ask me where I'm going, please recall that I am 3 parts indecision and 1 part reckless abandon. that I've seldom bothered to look back at the wreckage I've left in my wake and will never be bothered to master the flames at my fingertips anyways. I am not your poem. I was never your brushstroke. I am not your tragedy or your failed attempts to find meaning. I was never an answer to a question, so when you ask me, like dawn, if I will rise to your occasion, do not be disappointed when I reply with the dusk. That is all I've ever known.
Wow.
Thanks.
Wow, that was an experience. Just listening to
I
it.
try to take books on an experience. Like, I think that one of the things that I love about spoken word poetry is that words are beautiful on paper, but like to hear things out loud kind of provides like a new layer to meaning. And like, as a performer, like I love taking folks on like a theatrical kind of journey, like through those emotions with those like rises and falls of like feelings and
The
stuff.
delivery of it, right? And that reminds me, this one of my mentors told me that when you actually write something, like the words only hold like 20% of value, but it's
Yeah.
actually the tone and your body language that does the rest of the 80% of the communication.
Absolutely.
Like you can tell the difference when you read it yourself and when actually the author reads it out themselves. Like a huge difference.
Yeah, no, I one of the things that I've always loved is spoken word. I got into poetry because of YouTube leading me to like all these amazing poets online and just like falling in love with how they delivered the work. The impact was like so intense that it pushed me ultimately like to start like writing, which is pretty cool.
Before we dive a little bit into your past, I just wanted to get into so I guess that poem specifically. Kind of, was there anything particular that inspired you to write that, or?
So I was actually inspired by a friend who I was super close to like long ago, which feels like long ago, but it was like several years ago. Time seems to like just like extend, but it was just inspired by this woman who was super like just kind of carefree and did her thing and didn't really apologize for coming and going and being herself, and I just found her like intriguing, so I wrote a poem about her. Yeah,
that's cool, and just it's interesting to see like where kind of the seeds of inspiration come from too. And that's why, and you're right, like storytelling, right? And that's what we're trying to do here too, kind of share like people's story behind the scenes.
yeah.
But I wanted to transition now. So tell us a little bit about like what young Jasmin was like. How would you describe yourself as a child?
How was I as a child? So I was like a super like avid reader. That's something that like was consistent across like my life. Like I was the kid who would have like a book with me like all the time, and I would like walk into like walls sorry and just like get in trouble almost for like reading in like non-reading settings like the grocery store. So that's just like who I was. Like I was super passionate about like Harry Potter and like those like kind of like fantasy titles. I loved like kind of getting lost in a story and forgetting like the space that I was in. As a super little kid, like when I was in kindergarten or preschool, my mom would always read books to me like before bed, and I think that's like where my love for reading and writing comes from. Just like those like early kind of childhood moments. I also think like I was a very shy and quiet and introverted kid, which is super interesting because like the work that I do now is like mostly public speaking. Yeah, performance, right? Public speaking, like being on a stage in front of an audience, which definitely does not come naturally to me. And I would have been the person who tried her best to like kind of blend into the background. Like I didn't want to be noticed, and yet like things kind of happened in life that like led me to like this role, and things kind of changed, so that's kind of cool. Yeah.
Was was poetry always when did you get into poetry specifically, or what, like growing up were your aspirations always to be a poet?
I don't think so. So when I was in the 12th grade, I had a English teacher who gave me the opportunity to do like a free verse poetry writing assignment. And before that, like, poetry was this like structured kind of thing that I did not enjoy, but it was like more of an assignment, like being told to write sonnets and like rhyme schemed poems and things with certain beats. And that didn't really resonate with me because I felt like I was just trying to fit things into a box. But when I had the opportunity to write free verse, then it was like I could be as creative as I want and do whatever I wanted, which is, amazing. Just giving kids the opportunity to do what they want. Because so much of our lives are structured. So I started reading, Sufi poets like Rumi in high school. And I remember like being so taken aback by how like so few words on a page could like resonate so deeply and also like just being amazed that this person who lived like centuries ago could like resonate with me so personally today. I thought it was just like such a cool thing. So my love for poetry kind of came out of being a reader of poetry. And then in my first year of university, I kind of got super deep into spoken word on YouTube. And I would just like spend hours and hours like watching poets perform. And I was just like so amazed by like this craft that I just discovered. To the point that like I wanted to host poetry events, not because I myself thought that I was a poet, but because I just wanted to provide a platform for poets so that I can sit there as an audience member and appreciate this. And long story short, you know, in that first year when I was planning this first event, someone was like, hey, like, you know, are you going to perform? And I was like, I don't perceive myself as having that skill, but like, I guess I can try if we don't have enough performers. So I decided to try writing something, and very nervously like brought it to the event, and I got up on a stage and performed it, and that was like the beginning. And that was when I was like, wait, like maybe I can do this thing that I love myself.
So that's really interesting that you bring that up, especially because that's your first ever event and you're 19.
Yeah.
So going off of that, how did you get to where you are now? Like, what's been the journey like? What's that process of growth been?
Right. So I did my undergrad in English, and I did a concentration in creative writing. My plan, you know, since before I even got into university, was to go into teaching. And I thought that I would do English as a simple kind of way to get into teaching because I enjoyed English in high school. So when I did these creative writing courses, I did it because I found them fun, but I also knew that they would help me finish my program. So I didn't actually realize like what was happening or the fact that like I could pursue this further. I just thought that I would enjoy these classes while I did it and then move on to the next thing, which is teaching.
What was it about teaching that like really drew to that?
So going back to like my neighborhood where I grew up in a primarily Punjabi community, but all the teachers at my school were white. And there would be like, you know, things that would happen in our school, like super racist things that would happen where the teachers would say like discriminatory things to like South Asian kids. And I remember like as a kid, like hearing this kind of stuff and feeling uncomfortable and feeling like, you know, hurt by it, but not knowing whether I had any power to actually do anything about it. So becoming an adult, I realized how amazing it would be for me as a Punjabi woman to be a teacher in this community, to just like be able to remind kids that like it's okay to be yourself. Like when so many people are telling you that you are less than or you are the other, just to be seen is such a cool thing. So that's why I was so like, you know, dedicated to becoming a teacher, and I really enjoyed teaching as well. But it also contributed to my writing.
Right.
So in my undergrad, I started taking these creative writing classes. I loved them. Went ahead and finished my English degree and then jumped right into my teaching program. So I was super excited to get into that. I finished that in a year, and then I was off in a classroom very soon after that. So between when I graduated and when I started working was like about like 3 weeks.
Yeah.
And I knew that in that like pocket of 3 weeks, I would have to, I really wanted to go ahead and start working on a manuscript of poetry, because I knew that as soon as I start teaching, like I'm not going to have time to do anything else. So now is really my chance if I want to write a poetry manuscript, not really knowing where I could go with it, but just like knowing that I had this desire inside of me to write something. So essentially in that like 3 week kind of like, you know, yeah, in that window, like I, you know, opened up my laptop and pulled open this folder on my laptop called Poetry, where I would store all of my poems that I would, you know, was saving for this magical day that would come along when I decided to write a book. But I never really like, you know, that day didn't necessarily come as like this perfect day. It just kind of came together. But anyways, went into that folder and I started thinking about like where I could divide things and how I could structure things, and whether there were pieces in that folder that I could go ahead and put into a book. And when I started kind of putting things into different spots like a puzzle, I realized, you know, there are empty spaces as well where I need to write new material. So over that 3 weeks, I had like the inception of like the draft, and then around spring break in like March of that year, I finished the draft. And then just kind of held on to it, waiting to see what would happen. At the same time, I had a friend who is published who was encouraging me to finish it up so that she could show her editor at her publishing house. So that was like my motivation and my incentive to keep going. She ended up showing it to her publisher and they were interested. but she gave me like the greatest advice that ever been given by anyone in the world ever, which was that I need to think about working with a literary agent. And at the time, like I'd done a whole English degree in creative writing, but I had no idea what an agent's job was.
So what is that? What is a literary?
So a literary agent's job, it's kind of like a real estate agent. Their job is to represent you in negotiations with publishing houses. So if you don't have an agent, you're kind of representing yourself, and those negotiations around contracts and things, it's kind of on you. Which, if you are not experienced in this industry, can be like really, really daunting. And especially when you got someone on the other side who has a ton of experience and you're just like new, there's like a power imbalance. So a literary agent makes sure that you are being looked out for, that your best interests are being, put on the table. They're looking over your contracts, and they're trying to negotiate to get you the best possible contract. Okay. So my friend was like, get yourself an agent. And I was like, where does one find an agent? Like, I have no idea, like, what does that even mean? Because traditionally, when you're looking for an agent, you have to create a book proposal, and then you send it off to an agent by email, and then you wait a couple months and you see if you get any responses, because agents are, kind of particular about who they want to work with. So I was like, I don't know how long this is going to take. This is like really like up in the air. Like, what are we going to do with this? And coincidentally, around that time, an agent followed me on Instagram, and I was like, oh, this is like really interesting. Like, why? I wonder what she could possibly want to do here. So I knew she was following me, and then I just kind of like tried to think about what I wanted to do with this. So I did my research on her, which was super important. A lot of agents, they work on particular books. Some people want to work on horror. Some people want to work on, like teen fiction. Some are going to work on children's books. Like, if you're pitching to the wrong person, they're not going to be interested in your work. Mm-hmm. So I did my research. I realized that, unfortunately, she was not interested in poetry, and she was also not looking for new clients. So I was like, okay, like, maybe that's like kind of a dead end. But just, for the sake of trying, I did something super risky, which is like I sent her a DM, and which is something you're not supposed to do. And like, I do not recommend that people try that, because I got very lucky because she replied to me, but otherwise it could look super, super bad. The reason why I was like, I feel like I can DM you, is because she followed me first. I don't know. That was like it could have been a mess, but I got super lucky. So I DM'd her and I said, hey, like, I know that you're not looking for new clients, but I do have this kind of offer on the table with a publishing house. Like, would you be interested in, like, just reaching out to someone at your office, or do you have any suggestions for someone who might be interested in representing me? And then she responded by saying, oh, actually, like, I am looking for new clients. My website's just not updated. And I am looking for poetry. My website's, I just needed to change it on my website. Oh, wow. So I got like super, super lucky. And then we had a conversation like the next day, and she looked at my manuscript and she was like, yes, like right away. And that was like the beginning of like a lot of amazing things. Like, after that, I did my research. I made sure that like the contract was like right, because we tend to, as like artists, get like super excited about things, and then we forget to read the fine print. Right. And that's so important, because contracts are forever. Mm-hmm. So that's something that like I'm always like trying to like drill into people's minds. Like, you need to know what you are signing, because there are a lot of details that like we tend to miss. Yeah,
and you see that a lot in like the music business right now too, right? Yeah. Because you see with like artists wanting to own their masters, because for so long they just been signing because they got money, but now it's like coming back. So I guess to see that's applicable in like the spoken word and poetry field as well is very enlightening, for sure, to say the least.
Yeah. So what happened after that is, we worked on the proposal to the point that it was like as fine-tuned as possible, and then we pitched it to everywhere, like publishers across North America, and then we received about 5 responses from people, from different publishers and different editors, and in the end I got to work with my editor at Harper Teen, and she signed me for book 1 and book 2, right. Which we're still working on, and which was like the best possible outcome, and I never could have imagined that would have happened.
Wow. So I think, it sounds like a lot of your books, that's the book that you kind of spend writing, right? That you just launched now. So how long of work that is? Like, how many years of work is that?
I mean, I think that like unconsciously it was 7 years, because I was writing things without realizing that it was going to eventually end up in this book. Mm-hmm. But when I sat down to actually like write and then revise and specifically worked on this manuscript, it was the course of like a year to a year and a half of just like focused work and editing and revisions and all that kind of stuff. So I think like in total it feels like it was 7 years in the making.
And a lot of it's like even before the 7 years, because a lot of what you write about is like kind of fueled by your personal experiences, right?
Right.
Growing up, what you experience, stuff like that, and that's why I think that's like I don't know. It seems like that's what you find meaning in when you talk about women and obviously Sikh women and like as an immigrant and stuff like that. That's what you really find meaning in, right?
Yeah, and I think like the best writing is stuff that is authentic to who you are. The world doesn't need another book written in someone's voice who's never been through the stuff that they're talking about or has no relationship, I guess, with what they're talking about. I think that when we find ourselves in our work, that's where the most like powerful stories come from. And like I said, I didn't grow up like that where books sounded like me or looked like me. I didn't realize that there could be someone in a book who is a Sikh or like is a Sikh woman, because I'd never seen that before. So to be able to now be an adult and have the power to like insert that into my work is such a cool thing, because it's like we're kind of challenging this way, the ways in which we were told that we don't really matter in media or like literature by that erasure.
That's actually a really interesting point you bring up, and something I want to touch on that, because you also have a lot of fans that aren't Sikh, right?
Right.
So what do you think resonates with your followers about you, specifically like the non-Sikh followers? What is it, do you think?
So when I write, I often describe like my work as a serenade to Sikh women that I'm engaging in a public setting. So by that, what I mean is, while everyone in that space can engage in like that song or that work of art in a personal and meaningful way, I dedicate that work to Sikh women. And the reason why I do that is exactly what I said, just the fact that that's never really happened for me before. So to be able to do that now is like an honor for me. I think that it's really cool to me that like women of all backgrounds and people of so many different backgrounds like engage in my work. I think that a lot of the feedback I get from white women is that my work was an opportunity for them to step out of their world and learn about someone who is different, which I think is like the most like powerful thing that this work can do, just like educate someone else about what it is to live in our experiences, when there are these barriers that are often set up, of like understanding between people.
Right. And especially like in modern times, right? Like when you see in the US with Trump, like there's a lot of focus put on dividing people.
Right.
And to kind of have your work be this outlet for people to actually connect and get to know one another, I can only imagine like that must be a very powerful feeling. And even I think it's more important than it was in the past, like especially today, because there's a lot of polarization happening. So the fact that there's works like yours that are coming out and being able to, I guess, bring people together rather than dividing them is really important, and really it should be celebrated, I think. The question I had for you, so you said you started this when you were 19.
Right.
What does like the process look like of working on your craft? Like, is it you just keep writing, or like how do you know that you're getting better? How do you know that like kind of shed some light on that?
So in my undergrad, I did a lot of creative writing workshops. So essentially what that looked like was 20 writers in a room. Everyone submits their work or their poems or their fiction every week. You read through everyone's stuff and you write down all your edits, and you kind of tear the piece apart to strengthen it. And then we sit back down together and we discuss as a collective where we saw like space for growth in each work. And at the beginning of that whole editing process, like it was scary. Like it's like kind of unnerving to see people like tear apart your work when you're so emotionally attached to it. But by the end of it, what happens is your work comes out so much stronger. And that's what I loved about doing creative writing in my undergrad. I got so much feedback, and so much critical attention to my work that I could begin to kind of have that critical eye on my own work as well.
Right.
So by the end of those all those classes, like I could look at my own work and start to tear apart things that I wouldn't have really noticed before. Something really important that I learned in those classes was that communication isn't just what you intend for your audience to experience, it's what your audience is actually hearing. So I had to kind of step out of my work as being emotionally attached to it and start to think like, how is my audience going to take this? How is my audience going to understand what I'm trying to say? And if they're not understanding, then how do I create that understanding without affecting my authenticity as a writer? And the other thing is, emotional attachment is such a heavy thing within art and writing. Like we get so attached to what that first version of what something is, that we can't even see the possibilities for like what it could be, or what could happen if we tore the whole thing apart, erased everything, or threw out the page and started all over again. But once you detach yourself emotionally a little bit, amazing work comes out of that. But it's just like a little scary.
Removing your bias, basically.
Yeah.
Because like, I don't know, like when I was in high school, I'd write like an essay and be like, this is the best essay of my life, and I'd get like a 60% on it. I'm like, what? You know what I mean? So it's like, it's just kind of like a reality check, because you sometimes even you think you did such an amazing job, but there's like this blind eye where you have no idea how it would actually come, like what a third person's perspective might be. So it seems like that was a really insightful exercise you did to kind of grow your your literature skills, basically.
Yeah. So I mean, that I think shaped a lot of my work in a very meaningful way, and I'm so thankful that I went through those classes. And that's actually the reason why I want to go back to school, because I really want to be in like that space again where I have like 20 eyes on my work all at once, and people kind of like showing me like where there is space for growth.
Okay, so thanks for sharing that. And we got a lot of where you come from and a bit of your youth, but kind of want to focus on what's going on for you now. And I guess the first thing I want to talk to you about is your best experience so far as a touring poet, because obviously you've done you've done a tour, Australia tour, you've done a UK tour, you've done a North America tour. We were listening, you were on BBC Radio 1 as well. So like, seems like there's a lot of great experiences that you have. What's one of the best ones that you've had?
So when I first started this tour, for when you asked me where I'm going, my first show was in Vancouver. Like, that was my hometown kind of show. And there was this moment, when I just got on stage, I looked out into the audience, and there was this like little Punjabi girl like at the back of the room, and she was about like 7 years old, and she's looking at me, and I'm looking at her, and I was just like, like I talk about this, but in that moment, like I really like it was so like visceral and real and in my face, like just that it was a reminder of like why I'm doing what I'm doing. It's so that this little girl can look up on the stage and see someone who looks like her, and then see herself in that person, and ultimately do things that are beyond like what that person on stage is doing. And it was like just this powerful kind of reminder that despite all of the challenges, despite all of like the self-doubt, all the things that like we put in our heads as like creatives, there is a reason why I'm doing this work, and I need to keep doing it despite the things in my mind that can kind of like cloud my vision sometimes.
That's and that's a good thing you bring up. Actually, I want to touch on that more. So this self-doubt that comes with like taking risks and just trying new things, like how have you been able to overcome that? Or because you also said you're an introvert, right? Like, I can only imagine like you must have gone through a lot of personal growth to get to a point now where you're touring as a poet. Or like, what's the kind of the process of that, or how do you get yourself to take this leap essentially?
So I think for one thing, like I'm hardcore like perfectionist. Like I really need my work to be like its best self before I'm willing to share it. And if I see like anything that I want to change after I posted it, I just stress about it, and I just have to learn how to let it go. But for years, like I did not share my work publicly on Instagram because I was afraid of like just unhelpful and like just the kind of critique, like the kind of critique that's not trying to build you up, but just break you down and just, tell you that you shouldn't be here. I was super afraid of that, to the point that I would, write my poems, but I'd share them, with just my friends. And I think that if I could talk to myself, like, talk to my younger self, like what I would say is, don't let that fear stop you from doing the things that you want to do. Because beyond that fear are like the, things that you could never imagine. But I also know like I can live in that regret, but like things happen when they were supposed to happen, and that didn't stop all the awesome stuff that happened, with my writing. But that's, I guess, like that's my advice to like people that are younger and like trying to and grappling with that. Like those fears are founded because the internet is scary, but also like what you are doing is like so powerful and so much more important than that doubt.
And there's always going to be people that dislike and spread hate, and if you just try to like please everyone and make sure no one's sharing that sort of stuff, and because like for every, I don't know who said this, but it's like if there's a lot of people that hate what you're doing, there's also a lot of people that are going to share love for what you're doing, right? It's always polar. So I guess keeping that in mind and focusing on the love that you've got, and you've gone so much. So like you have a huge following, you have amazing turnouts at all these events, and like you're doing amazing.
Yeah.
The other question I have for you is how how have you been able to like find your community? Does it, or I guess, yeah, how have you been able to find that in a sense? Do people kind of just come up to you, or how are you able to find like the people that you really speak to in a sense?
I think I've met like so many amazing poets online. Some of the poets who I'm closest to, like Damneet Kaur, who's a poet from California, Decor on Instagram. We met through Instagram, just like being like mutual followers of one, and mutually appreciating one another's work and like just the quality of the work that she was creating. I would just like tell her that I loved her work, and then we connected based around like poetry and things like that. And now she's one of my closest friends, and we've like toured together. And I send my poems to her when I'm like working on them, and she'll give me like her feedback. So the internet has been like this really cool space where I've the world has become like smaller in a sense,
Yeah.
where I've had conversations with folks who I never would have thought, would be my closest friends, but like here we are. And I'm just like super grateful that I kind of took the leap and reached out to people on social media, because sometimes that can be like a daunting thing. And you don't want to like, it's just, you can overthink things a million times. But I found that, there are moments where like, so I'll reach out to someone and they aren't really interested, not very responsive, but other times I'll reach out to someone and they are like super supportive and they wanted to reach out as well. So I try my best to like build authentic relationships with folks on social media, and connect in meaningful ways like that.
Right. And I think it's so easy to get caught up in like the usernames, the hashtags, all the likes and stuff
Yeah.
like that, but then people kind of forget like it's a person on the other end
Absolutely.
too, right? And using this as like, these tools are made to just bring us closer and connect us, and not just be like forms of essentially popularity in a sense.
Right.
So it's really, actually, that's really insightful. I didn't even think of that, because that's one thing one of our previous guests mentioned too, that she's able to form these relationships with people in her industry just through social media. So big leveraging point there. The other thing, like before we go further, so you said you were really like you were really timid in a sense. You're very scared about putting your work out. Was there something like in particular that gave you this confidence, or what allowed you to take like your first big leap?
I think that there were, I was seeing so many sick women begin to share their work on social media. And I was just like amazed that like they were doing this thing that I really wanted to do, but like I hadn't yet found the courage to do so. And I think just like seeing them flourish and like blossom in their own right, without like this fear of like censorship or fear of like how folks would take it, was like the motivation I needed. I've taken so much inspiration from other women, and it's helped me in this context. The other thing was that I received a lot of positive feedback from other folks,
Yeah.
which gave me like the kind of courage to be able to share publicly. So, for example, when I was like 19 years old, and I shared in a private, space for sick women, the love I received there was like the motivation I needed to, propel my work further. So I think that self-love is super important, but sometimes we need reminders from outside of ourselves of like how amazing we are, and that's okay. Like it's okay for that to come externally sometimes, because we're socialized to believe that everything has to magically come from inside, and that's just not how life works. Sometimes we need a jump start, right? So I think that was the encouragement I needed, and then it kind of blossomed into all the other stuff.
Right. Okay. So I know we were kind of recently talking about technology, and you're talking about social media and how you connect with all these people. So I have a really like a genuine question for you, where because now everything is so technological. There's like Audible. There's all this stuff where it's like, is literature and like just book writing, poetry, is that somewhat getting lost, or do you think it's finding its way back?
So I see the value in sharing online, and I also see the value in having a physical book in front of you. So when I'm sharing online, what I loved about Instagram when I first got onto it was the fact that I could just go out there and say what I have to say, and there's no censorship. There's no gatekeeper to tell me which work is valuable and which isn't, which tends to, which can sometimes happen. I just love the idea of putting my stuff out there, and then someone in the world is going to see it instantly. conversely, the reason why I've always wanted to do a book is because where I'm able to post shorter pieces online, which is, the amount of attention that folks tend to have when they're looking at their phone for a second, then going back to work. When you have a book in your hands and you're holding it and nothing else is there to distract you, you can engage with the work in a different way. And sometimes you can sit with things longer and you can reflect more meaningfully because your attention is now singular. I really think that our phones and the way that, technology and Twitter and Instagram and all these kind of like, very quick apps work is that we can't focus the way that we perhaps once could. Our attention is, like,
right?
our minds are constantly going,
unconsciously grabbing that phone even if you don't want to look for something.
Like, we're reading 10 different, headlines at once and we're processing that and our brains are getting used to processing that really, really quickly. So when I disconnect and start reading fiction or, pick up a poetry book, that's when I'm kind of allowing my brain to come back into the present. And there's like, it's just like, it feels different because my mind is not in this thing that takes me into a million different worlds at once. It's just this one story that I'm experiencing in this moment.
Yeah. And I think like books are just so valuable. People don't realize because you said you worked on this for like 7 years basically, right? It's 7 years of your life plus all the experiences you went through, right? And it's all condensed into like 100 to 200 pages, 7 years of your life, all that work, right? And like imagine how much value it holds and so much more value than you can ever find in any sort of Instagram content or just any sort of like tweet or whatever, right? And I think people just fail to realize like how much there is to learn from books. And you hear like all these amazing, the top, industry professionals or anybody in their craft, they're all readers because there's just such a huge learning opportunity. And like to second what you said about the attention deficiency, like I've experienced this personally because I tried reading a book, like I'm trying to get into the habit, but it's a little bit difficult because you're so used to that instant gratification of, your music all the time and just like on your phone.
Yeah.
And it's hard, like to even get through a chapter, you're like, damn, this requires patience.
Yeah, but we did that when we were kids, which is wild. Like you had silent reading,
Yeah.
you know what I mean? And all you did for 40 minutes straight as a kid is just like look at a book because nothing else to do. But, that just kind of speaks to like how like technology is reshaping like our psychology and like our minds.
Mm-hmm.
And it's kind of wild when you think about it like that. Like
It's
our
crazy.
brains are changing.
It's crazy, yeah. And I think that's something I'll have to learn to kind of find that balance between technology and kind of use it as an asset and not, because like you want to own your phone, don't let your phone own you.
Yeah, so one thing that I do when I'm writing especially or when I'm reading is I have an app on my phone that just locks me out of Twitter and Instagram and everything. So I'll just like set it to like 2 hours and then for that time like I just can't access those apps and it helps. Like I write things in like 20 minutes that I previously could have taken like 2 hours and it's like amazing. I'm like, wow, like I don't have a challenge focusing. I just need to not have a distraction in front of me.
Yeah.
Going forward, I guess, so coming back, we were talking about your touring a little bit. Was there kind of like a moment, like you mentioned in Vancouver, you had that one hometown kind of feeling, but is there like a moment when, especially when you're going on these international tours, where you feel like this is like so surreal or this is like, I've kind of made it in a sense? Do you have any moments of that or how do you feel?
Okay. So here's a moment. I don't know if this is like not like I've made it moment. Instead, it was just like this really like, personal reflection. I was in Australia, and it was myself and Damneet Kaur and a group of our friends in Australia who are primarily turban, Dastad wearing Sikhs. We were at a restaurant, and like I'm very used to like eyes on me in a racist way, like from where I'm from in Abbotsford, like it's common for folks to like glare at me and like stare at me and sometimes like say like racist things to you. So that's how I grew up, used to that kind of like attention, that kind of negative attention. So I went to Australia and I'm in this restaurant and there was like a middle-aged white woman and she's just like staring at myself and my friends like with what I perceived to be like fear. And that really like shook me up and I turned to my friend and I was like, hey, like, she's staring at us. So my friend reached out to her and she's like, hey, like, are you okay? Like, why are you looking at my friends? And just kind of like, calling her out like that, just to get her to like reflect. And she shared that she was actually like looking at us because she recognized me from Instagram. And in that moment, like, my friends were like, oh, that's so cool and random. And I didn't perceive it like that. I was like, how strange is it that, like, I'm so used to, like, hate. that like someone is looking at me in like a positive way for once, and I'm like, my guards are up. And you kind of like blame me for having my guards up because like this is like a reality of like my life. So today I just think about that and just like how like what it means, and I'm trying to still like unpack it. But where for others that would have been like a cool thing, for me it was just like a reminder like that, you know, I am different to this point, that I have to kind of be like critical of like every interaction I have with folks.
Mm-hmm. So I think going off of that, he's talking about this tour and all these, that experience you had if you made it. How did you get to that point where you're getting offers to, go to Australia and UK, and like how did you develop yourself internationally? Because I know Canada, like yeah, if you're in Toronto or Vancouver, yes, there's opportunities, but to develop yourself to an international level, I think that's commendable. So how do you get from Vancouver to all these amazing places?
I think it's just like community building. Um, and building authentic connections with people. I personally like hate the word networking because it just sounds so gross to me. I would rather build like authentic, meaningful relationships with folks than just like network with folks for like my personal gain. Like that's just not me. So when it came to like like connecting with people in different communities, a lot of it came from just like building friendships with folks, and not expecting anything else out of it. You know what I mean? So like my friends in Australia who hosted me, they connected with my work. They had funding within the local Sikh community that allowed them to be able to support artists who they believe in. And what I think is amazing about like the Sikh community especially is that we do have like this support for one another as like artists, where if I have the resources in BC to host a poetry event, I'm going to go ahead and try my best to support artists from other communities and have them come out to BC. And then folks tend to do the same thing in Toronto and like California and the East Coast and the UK and Australia. So a lot of it has just been like the Punjabi and Sikh communities really pushing arts in their local area and wanting to bring in artists from other spaces, which I think is like a really like unique thing that we have going on. We have like this amazing history of like patroning the arts, and we pay it forward almost with one another, like even today.
The one question I have to ask, because you said like a lot of your support comes from the Sikh community and the Punjabi community coming together, right? I guess how have you kind of been able to? You're almost setting the trend in a way of going off the beaten path, right? Like everyone's parents, or most people's parents, especially in our community, are like, you have to go to university, get this sort of stable job. How are you kind of able to transcend that in a way, and how are you able to like keep paving the way?
So I think that there were definitely moments when I experienced that. I think that my sureness about what I was doing was what allowed me to continue despite, someone perhaps saying, hey, maybe this isn't a great idea, or maybe you should just like stick to like a traditional career, or, focus on school. I am super cognizant of the fact that, for a lot of our immigrant families, that desire to like encourage your kids on a traditional path isn't malicious. It comes from just, a fear of insecurity when, you have your immigrant parents coming from, Punjab or somewhere else, where their lives are not always stable, and, money is not always stable, and, working hard labor jobs to just like, build something for their children here, and then just hoping that their children can build on that foundation, and ultimately like just like have a peaceful life. So I get that impulse, absolutely. I also conversely understand why it's so important to stick to what feels right in your gut, because that is your life and that is, the rest of your existence. And if your art is speaking to, or your poetry, your music, or whatever it is, if that really is who you are, nothing in the world, in my opinion, should be able to like change that. So that was who I was. Like, even if I was told no, I'm still going to go ahead and do it, because I know that this feels so organic and so like true to who I am. And I had to kind of balance that and, honor both of those like parts of myself, and, all of what I was hearing. Right. And what's amazing is like, even though like there were times when, my mom might've been like super nervous about like, me going down a non-traditional path, fast forward in time, when things started coming together, I think that she could tangibly see what was happening. And then when she could tangibly see what was happening, then it was like, okay, this makes sense, and, go for it. But it took that process. It took that process of growth. I often say that our parents are growing up with us. in the sense that, like, you know, I'm the oldest child. Like, I'm the first, like, teenager that my parents raised, the first adult in you know, in their family. So they had previously not raised a teenager, and that's like something you got to figure out, like, you know, as a parent as well. And we don't really see that as like kids sometimes.
Yeah.
But they're figuring things out, and things change, and their perspectives also change.
Right.
So just holding space for that and being patient is like a huge thing.
I think that's a really great perspective you kind of bring up, because often we have these expectations of our parents to just be perfect, right? And we also have to understand they come from a place, like we have an opportunity that they didn't have. They just have to work like 12 hours a day, not because they want to, but because they got to feed their families,
Yeah.
right? And we now, they gave us this platform, they gave us this opportunity that, hey, you know, we brought you to this position where you can do whatever you want to. Like, and they want to give us an opportunity because they just want like the basic for us, right? What they had or a bit more. And you know, like I tell my mom like this all the time. Like, I'm grateful that I have the opportunity to self-actualize and kind of think about, oh, what brings me purpose, what brings me that, and not just focus on, you know, just to meet my survival needs. That's
Yeah.
a very lucky. Like, you don't even realize like how lucky we are to be able to do that.
Yeah, I feel like that's a quote that I read on Twitter. Something essentially saying that, like, you know, it was our parents' greatest hope to just like survive, and it's our, you know, luxury to self-actualize. And again, like, what a blessing that is that we have that opportunity, right?
Right. So now you're doing this full time, right? The one thing I want to ask you, does it kind of change in a sense? Because from something you were just doing on the side, like a passion of yours, do you feel more pressure now, or how, I guess, has your creative process changed or anything, or does it feel different in a sense?
So I think that having the thing that you love the most become your job, definitely changes things. Like, you know, there's that saying, like, if you do what you love, you'll never work a day in your life. And that's not true, because when you do what you love and it's your job, now you have to do an even better job. And you have that kind of like, that force within you trying to make you do something beyond what you've done before, almost. So it can put pressure on you, definitely. I think that when you're working within like a set time frame, for example, of when a project should be done, that organic kind of like process of getting to where you want to be doesn't always happen, because you just have to work. So like, for example, like, I would set, when I'm writing a novel or like a longer manuscript, like I have to set like a daily writing goal for myself. And I can't just wait around for the inspiration to arise, because like this is my job. So I need to find something inside of myself that writes that part of my manuscript that day. And whether it's perfect or not, that's okay. But I need something on paper so that I can build upon it and revise and improve the writing. So there's definitely like a structure to working as like an author. If you don't have that structure, then you're just waiting for a non-existent magical day of inspiration to hit, and nothing will actually come of your work. I think the other bit of pressure when you're working in a creative field is that, you know, you're taking this thing that you love, and that is just like a part of you, and now you need to sell it. And that kind of melding of like your art with like a capitalist industry can kind of take the soul out of you sometimes, and you have to kind of remind yourself of who you are in the process of that, because we can get very caught up in numbers and sales and like meeting quotas and all that kind of stuff that's like on the business side, and then forget like why the work started in the first place. So it's like a matter of like balancing, I think.
How do you reconcile the two? Because that's a big thing, right? Because some people think there's, like, you probably have an idea, like some things might sell better than others, right? But not compromising that with what you actually want to write about. How do you kind of reconcile the two?
I really, in my heart, believe that the most impactful writing is authentic.
Right.
No, I don't believe that just watering down ideas to be like super universal and like almost like meaningless or tasteless really is what people want. Like, I feel like people want to hear the author through the work, and through that commitment, that's how I stick to who I am, because I know it would be so easy to just like sound like what I think would sell. But the poems in the book that have resonated with folks the most have been the ones that I was afraid to write. You know, those poems that are like personal and reflect like who I am as like a Sikh woman or a Punjabi woman. It's those poems that have like left like a mark on folks, and I want to create work that like echoes, and not just stuff that kind of you double tap or you like in that moment, but then forget about like 10 minutes later.
Right. And I think that's why there's so many people that kind of resonate with what you're doing, because it's so genuine and authentic. It's not just you're just trying to put out work there. It's very very like organic in that sense, and people kind of relate and they feel your words, right? They're not just reading them; they kind of feeling what you're saying. So like I think that's one of the things why I can understand why you've kind of grown so much, and like something we can definitely appreciate. So going off of that, we want to do the segment that we have called "Looking Back,"
Okay.
where we kind of allow you to reminisce over like something when you early started out in your career, like an Instagram post or a tweet or something. Just kind of look over it. So do you have something of that sort?
Yeah.
It was that photo you were showing us earlier about at the cafe, right? What was the name of the cafe?
Yeah, so the cafe was Heartwood Community Cafe,
Right.
and this picture, which was taken in August of 2016, was at the last poetry event that the cafe hosted because, this is an amazing space driven by social justice politics, where like people would come together and like organize and like have events and all kinds of stuff. But oftentimes those spaces are not sustainable in a financial sense, and that's kind of what happened to this space. So they had to close down. But that cafe was one of the venue for one of my first events that I ever hosted. So it held like a lot of memories for me. And then just like looking at the picture, like it just like takes me back to like a time where I felt like a different person almost because we grow so much, just like on a daily basis. But like to think back to like, 2016 even is like wild to me.
I want to dig a little deeper. Like, what exactly do you feel? Like, what are the feelings you kind of get when you reminisce on that photo versus where you are now, in a sense? Like,
I think that like I didn't know like what was to come.
yeah,
I was just like being super present in that moment and listening to these poets and just like feeling gratitude to be in a space where I got to hear like an art form that makes me authentically happy. I think that like my happiest moments in life have not been when I'm on the stage, but when I'm sitting in the audience experiencing like spoken word. And then one of my happiest moments in life was in this cafe, like just like sitting there feeling grateful to be able to listen to someone's art. Like that gave me authentic joy. And that's what I feel, just like that freedom from like all of like the kind of business constraints of like life that kind of can bog us down sometimes or stress us out. Just returning to that part of myself that was just happy to be there and just like free, totally present. Yeah. It's kind of amazing.
So as we kind of talked about what's going on for you now, but we want to kind of transition into what's the next step for you in the future. I know you said you have a second book coming out.
Yeah. So when I go home tomorrow, I am going to head back home and start working on edits for my second book. So I had the first draft of book 2 written, and book 2 is more of like a traditional novel in the sense that it's primarily written in prose, but also in poetry as well. So I spent the better half of the year working on that first draft, and now after getting edits from my editor, I'm going to go ahead and apply all of that feedback and create the final copy of the book. So I've got 2 months to do that, and I'm very nervous, but also super excited to make that happen and then see this next book come out in the world eventually.
right. What does kind of success look like for you, or what do you want your legacy to be?
To me, success looks like staying authentic to myself. I think that if I can die while being true to who I am, then I will have been successful. From a Sikh perspective, I have always, as long as I have read Sikh scriptures, understood that everything in life is temporary. No amount of attention folks give you, no amount of wealth, none of that really will stick with you forever. And all that stuff is super, super temporary. So to get caught up in it, it is to be misguided. So just to stay authentic to myself and my craft and to continue creating art that I believe in, I think would make me successful, and I could live with myself if that was the case.
Right.
And I think that resonates with me too. I can completely understand what you're saying, that contentment of when you go home and you're like, hey, if something were to ever happen to me, I would be very satisfied because I'm on the right path. Even if I haven't reached that envisioned destination, I'm on the right path towards it, right?
Absolutely.
And I think going off of that, I would like to ask, because there's so many new young authors and poets coming out, what message would you have for them?
trust your art, and don't let fear dictate what you do and don't do, because beautiful things happen when you step outside the bounds of your fear. And that's what I would say to myself, and that's what I would say to like anyone out there. Also know that becoming an amazing author is a process of growth. No one is like born just like dropping books like J.K. Rowling. It comes from like a lot of work, and it comes from edits. And my favorite author, one of my favorite authors, Ocean Vuong, wrote 12 drafts of his best-selling book, On Earth We're Briefly Gorgeous. That didn't just come out the first time perfect. It came with a lot of work. So open yourself up to becoming the author or the creative that you can be. Believe that you can get there, but know that it will be a process of work.
Right. And one last thing actually I wanted to touch on that we didn't touch on earlier, but you were featured at the 2018 AMAs, right? With, I believe, J-Lo featured your poem, Scream, was it?
Yeah.
What did that moment kind of mean for you?
So that moment came after, a week where my work, that poem went viral on the internet. And it went viral because, my words were changed around, edited, altered, like folks crossed out, word from my poem and replaced the word scream with vote. It came after me feeling so uncomfortable with this like random edit that someone else did with a permission, that I wrote about how uncomfortable I was. And I wrote about how it's not okay to take my work without permission, without crediting me, or without, honoring my original purpose. When I shared that feedback with my audience, people resonated with that, which I was so grateful for, because I was so scared to like speak up for myself. But people resonated with that, and ultimately me speaking up for myself allowed that poem in its original form to like find more people that it was meant for. And I think that's how J-Lo found it. So like, when it was there, it was like a moment of, just appreciating the fact that me standing up for myself and my art, meant that more people got access to it, which was like very reaffirming. And it was also this cool moment, where I got to appreciate the fact that so many sick girls, sitting at home, got to like see their name, like God, on TV, which is like such a, it's kind of a cool thing. Just to be able to see yourself in like the media that like you consume. So I think that's why it was so cool to me.
Right.
Just the fact that it pushed our stories forward in like a small way.
Right. And you've attributed a lot of your success to like being true to yourself, right? What advice would you have for like younger people, especially minorities, that are kind of, there's always like this societal pressure to conform. Like what advice would you have for like staying true to yourself and the power that holds?
I think that it's easy to fall into those patterns of fear that tell us that you have to just do what everybody else is doing in order to, achieve this level of like success or whatever that means. But the world doesn't just want someone that sounds like everyone else. Folks are tired of that. People want you to be you, and that's why folks are going to listen to you. They're not going to listen to you because you fit into, a comparison to someone else. People are looking for something that's unique. So be that unique thing. Be yourself,
right.
And let your audience naturally build around that.
Cool. And the last question we have for you, we ask all our guests this. In one word, how would you define a game changer?
Let me think on that for a second. I would define a game changer as that moment where you begin to believe in your own hype, which is like kind of cliche, but I really believe that when you believe in yourself enough, to own your talent and not make apologies for it, and not come with like, I'm not there yet, but I'm sorry, but I'm trying, but I'm kind of a poet, but like, like I'm an aspiring writer, whatever that means. When you just kind of own your talent and say, yeah, I'm a writer, folks believe it. And you have to be the first person to believe in yourself. And then that kind of authenticity follows, and people will buy into your work. But it comes from taking that time to not discount who you are and what your talent is.
Right. That kind of reminds me of this one quote. It's one of my favorite quotes, where it's like, it's not our darkness, but our light that frightens us the most.
Yeah.
And like, it kind of resonates to what you just said about, just trusting your hype, like you said, and believing in the path that you're on, and the love that you're getting.
Absolutely. I think we're constantly knocking ourselves down, and there's no reason why we have to do that, because we're doing amazing things, and that's cool. That's okay.
Exactly. Right. All right. That's essentially all the questions we had for you. Thanks a lot for being on the show. I'm sure it was enlightening for us and for sure for our viewers as well. We'll just the last little bit. We'll give you like a platform. Where can people find your book? Where can people find you on Instagram? Just I guess your opportunity to promote yourself and plug yourself.
Yeah. So you can find my book at your local bookstore. I'm big on like buying from indie bookstores because it's hard to own an independent bookstore. You can also find me at like Chapters and Indigo, and online at your favorite online bookseller. You can find me on Instagram. My Instagram handle is Jasmin, Jusmun. If you like listening to Twitter rants or reading Twitter rants, you can find me on Twitter. My Twitter handle is Jasmin, Jusmun, Kaur, Kaur. And if you're on neither platform, you can find me on my website, which is jasminkaur.com, JasminKaur.com.
Right.
All right. Well, thanks so much for being on, and it was enlightening listening to your poetry and your words, and just your experience is amazing for us. And I think I learned so much just from this podcast to hear you talk about your experience and your story. So thanks so much for coming on.
Thank you for having me.
All right. Thank you guys so much for watching, and we'll have this podcast out soon. Stay tuned, and we'll see you later.